Snow can make a town look clean, but it can also hide everything beneath it. Imagine a quiet winter evening in suburban Michigan, where children ride their bicycles through slush-covered streets, and parents wave from warmly lit windows, believing the world outside is still safe. Yet something cold moves beneath this peaceful surface, colder than the wind, colder than the snow itself. A silent figure watches, selects, and takes what cannot defend itself. No screams, no witnesses, only a child who suddenly does not come home. For more than 4 decades, this has remained an unsolved mystery, a cold case with a dark past that continues to haunt Oakland County. Today, we open a psychological file of a predator who walked among families without leaving chaos behind. Lee Stillness. Winter, in 1976, settled over Oakland County like a heavy blanket that refused to lift. Snow layered the sidewalks, rooftops, and schoolyards, creating a quiet that felt deeper than usual. It was the kind of silence that looked peaceful from a distance. Yet something inside it felt off, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Residents continued their daily routines, greeting each other at grocery stores, shoveling driveways, and watching their children play in the fading daylight. Laughter still echoed across the streets, but it sounded slightly restrained, like a smile given out of habit rather than comfort. Parents looked longer out their windows, not because they were admiring the weather, but because the cold made them uneasy. The winter was not harsh because of blizzards or frozen roads. It was harsh because there was a presence that no one could see. Fear spread across the community without a single warning or headline. It settled like frost, subtle but sharp, and every parent became aware of how fragile safety could be. The innocence of suburban life felt as if it were being quietly observed by something that never introduced itself. Amid this environment lived a boy named Mark Stebbins, only 12 years old. He moved through life with the restless energy of someone excited for the future. Mark loved running, especially long distances, and he dreamed of one day joining the police. His teachers described him as determined, the kind of child who did not quit even when he fell behind. His small ambitions came from a pure place, untouched by cynicism. Mark's family was not wealthy, yet their home radiated warmth. The house was modest, with mismatched furniture, school projects taped to the walls, and a kitchen that always smelled like simple meals cooked with care. There was no luxury, but there was joy. The sound of his laughter filled small spaces and made them feel bigger. The family had very little, but they understood how to love sincerely. On a late winter afternoon, Mark left home to run a short errand. It was a simple decision, one made without second thoughts, as if nothing dangerous could exist between home and a corner store. He wore his jacket, stepped outside, and vanished into the ordinary. In that moment, no one understood that normal actions can become tragic simply by crossing paths with the wrong person. He never returned. For the family who expected him back within minutes, time began stretching painfully. What was supposed to be a quick trip became an endless silence. A simple absence became a wound. The world outside that seemed harmless was suddenly revealed to be capable of swallowing someone whole without a sound. As police questions began spreading through the neighborhood, attention quietly shifted toward people who blended into everyday life. There was a solitary neighbor who always appeared to linger outside, just long enough to watch children before stepping back into his house. There was a man who volunteered in community events, especially those involving kids, always present but rarely remembered. Another resident often sat in his car for long periods, simply observing, as if waiting for something unspoken. None of these individuals had committed a crime publicly or acted in a way that broke rules. They lived among everyone else, unnoticed until fear forced the community to examine every face twice. The unsettling truth was that a predator could exist without leaving a trail of threats or warnings. Danger does not always arrive with violence or intimidation. Sometimes it stands quietly, learning routines, gaining trust, and waiting. The idea of a silent hunter began to take root in people's minds. He was not imagined as a monstrous figure, but rather someone ordinary, patient, and calculating. He was the type of person who understood the value of invisibility. Predators who live among families do not want attention. They want access, familiarity, and time. Their power comes from how forgettable they appear, how normal their actions seem until it is too late. The setting of Oakland County amplified this fear. It was a compact community where everyone believed they knew each other, where streets felt predictable and safe. Neighborhoods were filled with trusted schools, stable churches, and friendly police. People celebrated birthdays, attended local sports games, and helped shovel one another's driveways. The illusion of security was built through repetition, through familiarity, and through a belief that danger belonged to distant places. Yet beneath this sense of unity were secrets that no one wanted to examine. Every town has them, and every community prefers to ignore them. Behind closed doors existed marital conflicts, addiction issues, hidden abuse, and individuals who struggled mentally but never sought help. Darkness does not have to be visible to exist. Families often hide their pain to preserve appearances, and neighbors rarely ask questions if someone seems a little off. Silence becomes protection, even when it shelters something destructive. People believed monsters belonged in movies, novels, or faraway cities. They imagined evil as something obvious, dramatic, and uncontainable. They believed someone dangerous would stand out, show signs, or make threats. But the truth is different. Evil is often patient. Evil can smile politely, attend church, hold a steady job, and wave at children. Evil can be quiet enough to blend in until it no longer needs to hide. By the time Oakland County understood the danger lurking in its quiet neighborhoods, it was already too late. A child had vanished without a trace, and nothing that once felt familiar could be trusted again. Snow that used to bring calm now covered tracks, hiding the movements of someone who walked among them. Darkness no longer marked the end of a peaceful day. It became a space where something waited, patient and deliberate. Even the most ordinary faces seemed uncertain, carrying the possibility of a secret no one could see. What followed would unravel every idea the community held about safety, innocence, and the people they lived beside. The winter was not just cold, it was watching, and it was waiting. There was nothing unusual about that afternoon, a grey winter day, the kind that felt heavy on the skin, with wind carrying thin sheets of snow down the quiet suburban streets. Mark Stebbins sat in his living room, shoes still dusted with playground dirt, cheeks flushed from the cold. He told his mother he was just stepping out for a little while. "I'll be back in 20 minutes, he promised with a small grin. There was nothing dramatic about that smile, nothing that hinted it might be the last one anyone in his family would ever see. Mark pulled on his coat, pocketed a few coins, and walked out the door. His footsteps pressed lightly into the slushy snow. In this community, a 12-year-old walking alone was not a reason for concern. Most of the neighborhood kids walked to school, to friends' houses, or to the store on their own. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone believed this place was safe. But safety, when assumed, is a fragile illusion, especially when no one realizes something is watching from underneath it. The last confirmed person to see Mark alive was the clerk at the neighborhood convenience store. She remembered the boy standing in front of the candy rack, counting coins carefully before picking a few small items. Nothing seemed strange. There were no suspicious customers, no hurried movements, no signs that Mark was being followed or accompanied. Even when he left, nothing drew attention to him. Maybe the only unusual detail was that dusk was settling faster than usual, and local kids rarely stayed out alone once the sky began turning black in winter. Investigators later estimated the window of Mark's disappearance between 4 o'clock p.m. and 8 o'clock p.m. 4 hours vanished, swallowed into silence. No scream pierced through the cold air. No tire marks indicated a sudden stop or forced abduction. No witness reported a struggle, a suspicious vehicle, or a boy being dragged away. It was as if Mark had stepped into a tear in reality, a gap opening right in the middle of familiar streets, swallowing him without leaving a trace. Law enforcement and volunteers began searching as soon as the family reported him missing. They combed the streets, the schoolyard, the frozen baseball fields, and the wooded patches between houses. Flashlights swept through the darkness, their beams cutting across growing snowdrifts. Yet, the snow, freshly fallen, revealed something alarming. Around the area of the store, there were no unfamiliar footprints, no signs of movement beyond the usual neighborhood traffic. Even more chilling, investigators could not find a clear set of prints leading away from where Mark should have walked home. There were only two possibilities, both disturbing. Either someone had picked Mark up in a manner so calm and natural that he didn't resist, or something had occurred before he even had the chance to leave on foot. A car parked close enough that its tracks blended with the regular tire marks on the street. A familiar adult who often spoke to children and didn't raise suspicion. A volunteer, a neighbor, someone who waved to parents and pretended to care about the safety of the community. In a town built on trust, anyone could become invisible simply by being recognized. And so, for those 4 hours, Mark was nowhere and everywhere at once. His absence was silent. His disappearance was clean. There was no broken button. No more torn fabric, no smeared footprints, nothing to hint at fear. It suggested a predator who didn't chase, didn't grab, didn't fight for control. Someone who approached with comfort. Someone who understood children, maybe someone who prepared. The silence finally fractured 3 days later. A truck driver spotted something lying on a roadside embankment, a shape small enough to be mistaken for debris, dusted lightly with snow. But as he slowed down, he saw fabric, skin, and a shock of hair. The authorities arrived quickly, but even hardened officers felt the weight of what they saw. Mark Stebbins lay on his side, arms neatly placed against his torso, eyes closed gently as if sleeping. His skin was pale from the cold, but there was no chaos, no tangled clothing, no dirt from a struggle. His shirt had been washed, not just washed, clean and pressed. His hair was neatly combed. The boy's body had been groomed. Someone had cared for him, or at least pretended to. The child wasn't left in a hurry, wasn't pushed aside like something unwanted. He'd been placed carefully, as if someone believed his body mattered even after his life had been taken. He looked more like a memory put on display than a victim abandoned in the snow. Nothing about his death felt reckless or emotional. There were no signs of panic, no traces of a sudden attack. Whoever took Mark had time enough to wash him, redress him, and maintain his appearance. It wasn't anger. It wasn't chaos. It was deliberate, methodical, and disturbingly calm. The killer didn't just keep him alive for a short while. He cared for him, but not with compassion, with possession. It was as though the child was an object to protect, preserve, and control. This was someone who wanted to keep him, someone who believed Mark still belonged to them even after he stopped breathing. The snow no longer acted as a blanket, hiding the truth. Instead, it exposed something far more horrifying than violence. The killer's behavior revealed intention. The neat placement, the cleaned body, the fresh clothing, they all pointed to someone who wanted their actions noticed. Someone unafraid of being recognized. This wasn't the work of a person trying to escape, terrified of capture. This wasn't a rushed crime where the murderer fled and prayed to be forgotten. Instead, every sign suggested the opposite. This was a message left behind, a demonstration of control, almost like a signature waiting to be interpreted. If Oakland County thought this was a mistake or a kidnapping gone wrong, the evidence said otherwise. This killer planned ahead, intended to repeat it. Mark's death wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The investigation began like a cold engine trying to start in winter, slow, confused, and far too quiet. Detectives combed through Mark Stebbins' clothing, his hair, the fibers stuck to his jacket. And then, the first jolt of shock emerged from the crime lab. Strands of hair, small fibers, and traces of DNA were found on his body. But none of them belonged to his family. These were not household fibers, not laundry residue, not a careless transfer from someone Mark knew. They were from somewhere else. Someone careful enough to leave almost nothing, yet patient enough to groom the child before returning him to the world like a twisted gift. Police questioned dozens of locals, men who lived alone, volunteers who worked closely with children, teachers, store clerks, quiet neighbors who waved politely every morning. Some seemed too nervous, some too calm. None matched the DNA. And somehow, every suspect seemed to fall short of being the monster they were looking for. No one seemed to fit the psychological picture, patient, organized, and disturbingly gentle in their violence. Amid the chaos, something even more worrying happened. A report about a dark blue vehicle with a strange driver near the convenience store was noted, and then ignored. The witness who reported it wasn't considered credible. It was winter, visibility was low, and no one wanted to chase a ghostly description. The lead slipped through frozen fingers, dismissed in a paragraph on a police log. That detail would later haunt the case, like a missing puzzle piece everyone knew belonged somewhere. Meanwhile, the media swarmed like vultures. Newspapers blasted frightening headlines. Child found murdered, predator still roaming free. Reporters clogged streets, cameras flashing at sobbing families, while television stations replayed Mark's smiling school portrait until it became an omen. Fear surged through Michigan. Parents refused to let children walk alone, even a few steps to the mailbox. Neighborhood shops suddenly felt dangerous. Every polite stranger looked like a possible monster hiding beneath normal skin. Mothers cried quietly as they locked doors twice at night. Fathers stood awake at windows, staring out like sentinels, guarding invisible enemies. Neighbors stopped trusting one another. The friendly waves turned stiff, suspicious. Oakland County no longer felt like a community. It felt like prey. The rumors multiplied faster than evidence. The killer lives among us, whispered corners of supermarkets, school parking lots, and church gatherings. He might be someone we know, someone we trust. Fear became its own detective, drawing conclusions without proof. As authorities struggled to regain control, three dominating theories took shape, turning the case from a simple murder into a psychological battlefield. Theory A. The ritualistic killer supporters of this theory focused on the washed and ironed clothing, insisting the killer wasn't hiding guilt but trying to purify his actions. The grooming felt ritualistic, almost ceremonial, as if the crime was being cleansed rather than concealed. Each detail, the clean hair, the neat clothes, the preserved appearance, resembled a twisted form of devotion. Not rage, not panic, but a dark prayer carried out with unsettling care. To them, this wasn't just a murderer abducting children. It was someone who believed they were keeping them, even in death, as if preserving innocence for themselves alone. Theory B. A staged crime scene. Others argued the complete opposite. The tidy clothing wasn't ritualistic at all. It was a trap, a staged performance designed to mislead investigators. Some detectives believed the killer washed and dressed Mark not to honor him, but to erase evidence, DNA, wounds, signs of abuse, anything that could reveal the truth. If this theory was correct, then nothing about the body reflected care. It was deception, a calculated distraction meant to make police chase psychological motives while the real clues disappeared. In this version, the killer was anti-sentimental. He was mocking everyone involved. Theory C. The one no one would suspect. The third theory spread quietly through homes and police offices alike. Maybe the killer wasn't a loner or a ritual-obsessed deviant. Maybe he was respected. A man with good manners, a clean record, someone trusted. A teacher, a coach, a volunteer, a neighbor who helped with school events and youth programs. The kind of person parents felt safe leaving their children with. Not an outsider, but someone welcomed into the community, protected by admiration. In this theory, the predator didn't hide in shadows, he hid in plain sight, shielded by reputation, thriving because no one would ever suspect him. As theories clashed and pressure mounted, the detectives began asking a question they never dared share publicly. But privately, it haunted every investigator who could take a child, keep him alive for days, treat him gently, and then leave him like something treasured. It wasn't the violence that terrified them. It was the tenderness. A tenderness so deliberate, it felt like ownership. Not hatred. Not impulse. A twisted form of care. Something that didn't, they simply killed, possessed. While locals argued, protested, and accused one another, police chased empty leads, and media hysteria fueled paranoia. Children stopped playing outside. Parents stopped trusting neighbors. The crime scene, pristine and controlled, mocked the chaos it created, as if the killer enjoyed watching a community unravel. Every theory seemed possible, yet every suspect felt wrong. There was DNA, there were clues, but the meaning behind them slipped away like something purposely coded. Investigators stood knee-deep in evidence that spoke clearly, but refused to explain itself. Oakland County was drowning in fear, yet the killer remained silent, patient, almost curious. Then, just as detectives began to exhaust every angle, something new emerged. A detail that had been overlooked, not because it was hidden, but because it was too ordinary to notice. A discovery linking Mark Stebbins to another missing child, one who had vanished under eerily similar circumstances, and would soon be found in an equally chilling condition. Suddenly, every theory collapsed. This wasn't a single tragedy. It was a design, and the killer was only getting started. To understand the Oakland County Child Killer, we must stop looking only at the crime and start examining the mind behind it. The killer's actions were not impulsive, not rushed, not driven by anger or panic. Instead, every detail pointed to something unsettling. Control. He prepared, waited, selected, groomed, preserved, and then released his victims as if returning borrowed objects. This pattern reflects a psychological hunger far darker than aggression. It is the hunger to own another life completely, the act of cleansing the children's clothes, of keeping them for days, of ensuring not a trace of chaos remained, reveals a twisted desire to create a perfect possession, one that cannot leave, speak, or resist. This mindset aligns eerily with an ancient Eastern psychological concept. The fear of losing control over the self becomes the desire to own others. In Buddhism, attachment rooted in insecurity becomes suffering. In Confucian thought, excessive control of others reflects a weakness in mastering oneself. When the mind fears abandonment or powerlessness, it searches for a form of ownership, so absolute that nothing can escape it. In Christianity, this distortion mirrors the obsession to purify sin through ritualistic cleansing, a metaphor corrupted into cruelty. The killer's act, then, is not about violence. It is about possession born from fear. He cared for the victims because they were substitutes for something missing within him. The washing of clothes could be interpreted not as kindness, but as a way to claim ownership over innocence, removing what he defined as corruption. The child becomes a vessel for his insecurity, and in destroying the victim, he attempts to destroy his own perceived impurity. As the case remained unsolved, investigators realized that the killer could not be just anyone. He had to be someone comfortable with children, someone who could approach them without arousing suspicion, someone who understood trust and how to manipulate it. This realization reshaped investigative focus. Teachers, counselors, youth volunteers, social workers, clergy, community helpers, coaches, and anyone whose work revolved around protecting children. The killer likely lived close to his victims, but beyond proximity, he also held psychological access. His victims trusted him more, at the very least, felt no reason to fear him. He did not need force. His weapon was familiarity. In the 1970s, the science needed to identify Mark's killer simply didn't exist. Investigators collected hair strands, fibers, and trace evidence, yet those samples were little more than dead ends. DNA profiling hadn't been invented, and forensic laboratories could only compare shapes and textures under a microscope. The killer walked freely, protected not by intelligence, but by the technological limits of the era. Today, that same evidence is no longer useless. Cold case specialists believe it holds answers that were impossible to access in 1976. Modern, forensic tools can pull genetic markers from even degraded hair fragments, reconstructing profiles once thought unreachable. With techniques like genealogical DNA tracing, investigators can identify family connections, building a biological map that narrows suspects through entire bloodlines. What was once incomplete can now speak. Decades later, science may finally give a voice to evidence that has waited in silence for nearly half a century. Yet even advanced DNA databases require one crucial factor. The killer must have left a trace that can be matched to a living relative. The fear remains that he died decades ago, taking his identity to the grave. That possibility adds another layer of terror. If a predator dies unnoticed, without punishment, it forces society to face a terrifying truth. Some monsters vanish not into myths, but into memory, blending back into the ordinary world as though they never harmed anyone. The consequences of this case extend far beyond the victims. Oakland County suffered wounds that never healed. Parents began watching teachers differently. Neighbors locked doors, not out of habit, but out of suspicion. Communities that once celebrated school events with pride began seeing danger in every unfamiliar face. Trust was no longer given. It had to be earned. And even then it felt unstable. The killer did not only murder children, he murdered the community's belief in safety. He turned innocence into a liability. Childhood became something that needed policing, not something that could be carefree. When fear becomes routine, society learns to survive without faith in one another. The parents of Oakland County carried that burden for life. The children who survived that era learned to grow up faster. They were taught that the world could turn against them quietly and that danger sometimes smiles as it approaches. This emotional inheritance remains decades later, shaping how a generation perceives trust. The killer did not simply take lives. He implanted a legacy of vigilance, as if he sculpted fear into the community's identity. What lingers most ominously over the Oakland County Child Killer case is not merely the physical horror of the crimes or the unsettling precision used to commit them. the truly disturbing realization strikes at something deeper, something existential. It forces a question about the very nature of evil itself. We grow up believing that evil announces itself, that it looks menacing, unstable, predatory, in a way we can clearly see. We imagine danger as something separate from our everyday lives, something we can avoid simply by being cautious. But what happens when darkness doesn't lurk on the outskirts of society, but instead stands right beside us? Smiling, helpful, harmless, trusted. Evidence suggested that the killer might not have been an outcast or a stranger living in the shadows. He could have been someone respected, someone praised, for community involvement. Someone parents felt safe letting near their children, a coach, a volunteer, a neighbor who brought cookies to family gatherings, a well-liked figure who knew how to earn affection before taking it away. This realization destroys the belief that kindness equals safety. It reveals how cruelty can hide inside care, and how tenderness can become control. When protection and predation blur into one, only one question remains: which is more frightening, evil itself, or evil disguised as love? Unsolved crimes force us to look inward. We fear the evil lurking outside, yet rarely acknowledge something far more unsettling. Predators can hide among kind neighbors, helpful volunteers, and trusted friends. The silence of this case becomes a mirror, reflecting a deeper truth about human nature. It asks whether danger lives only in the shadows, or whether it can quietly exist within a community we believe to be safe. If fear is a warning, perhaps the true mistake is ignoring it. Perhaps the lesson is not to live in suspicion, but to understand how easily trust can be manipulated, how innocence can become a target, and how control can disguise itself as care. If you want more hidden case files, remember to like, share, and subscribe to help us continue uncovering buried truths. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.